I want to talk about Ukraine because, as we've said actually quite often over the past few weeks, it seems to have fallen off the agenda quite substantially. And that's partly because of what's happening in Israel, which I understand that. Sort of the newest thing that happens always tends to get precedence. But when you look at what was hoped for from Ukraine over the past 6 months, what we all hoped that Zelensky's spring offensive would reap some rewards. It got a bit stuck. And Russia seems to have, taken some optimism from that. And some of the stories that we read certainly over the past couple of weeks show the Russians really bombarding Ukraine in a way that maybe they haven't done for some time. And then you hear stories from America about the fact that the American Congress is not going to approve any more resources to arm Ukraine. Scandalous, in my view. We'll come back to that in just a moment. But I wonder if we're having this conversation in a year's time, whether we think that the international community would have stepped up to the plate in the way that it has done over the last couple of years in 2024, because I'm beginning to wonder whether that will happen. I'd like to get your perspective on this. What do you think should happen about Ukraine in 2024? It's very easy to say, well, Ian, there should be a negotiated peace. Well, to my mind, the only people that can negotiate that peace are the Ukrainians themselves. It can't be done by the United Nations. It can't be done by Britain. It can't be done by the EU. It can't be done by America. It has to be done by the Ukrainians, by Vladimir Zelensky. He is the one that I think has earned the right to do that. If there is to be any sort of compromise with Russia, it's not something that the international community, I think, can insist on. It's something that Ukraine would have to voluntarily submit to. I'm not advocating that. I want Russia out of Ukraine. I want every single Russian soldier out of Ukraine and Crimea and the Donbass. And I want Russia to respect international borders. And the only way that Russia is going to do that in future is for its folly in Ukraine to be shown as just that, complete and utter futile folly. Now, we know that hundreds of thousands of Russians have died or been killed in this war. We know that tens of thousands of Ukrainians have as well. At some point, there will be a reckoning for Vladimir Putin, and I hope that reckoning comes as soon as possible. But how can NATO, how can Britain, how can America try and bring that about? How do you see the next 12 months for Ukraine? 0345 6060 973. Well, let's talk to LBC's US correspondent, Simon Marks, who joins us live from Washington, D.C. Simon, very good evening. What on earth is the US Congress playing at?
Well, good evening to you, Ian, and Happy New Year. Although not a Happy New Year thus far for supporters of US assistance to Ukraine, because, as you know, the United States basically ran out of money to devote to support for Ukraine at the end of the year. And unless and until Congress agrees to support President Biden's request for fresh assistance, and it's not just fresh assistance for Ukraine that he's also seeking additional packages of support for Israel as well, unless the United States Congress finds some way of keeping the US government open, getting through yet another one of these edge-of-the-abyss crises that we're about to encounter here about a possible US government shutdown, and agrees in those negotiations to restore funding for Ukraine, then it's going to be extremely difficult for President Biden, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin to offer the Ukrainians very much in the way of the fresh military assistance that they say they desperately need as they try to turn things around in that somewhat stalled effort to push back Russia as we head through the rest of the winter and towards the spring. Now, the passion with which you just spoke about the issue is not something that, frankly, we hear very much of on this side of the Atlantic at the moment. It is occasionally articulated by President Biden, although he's not made an address to the nation on this topic and told Americans why it is so vital for fresh funding to be passed to keep Kiev supported and sustained through its efforts to push back against Russian aggression. And he finds himself facing Republicans who oppose the concept of authorizing fresh money for Ukraine for a variety of different reasons, depending on which particular grouping of the party you're looking at. There's the Donald Trump Make America Great Again, Freedom Caucus, far-right Republicans who oppose providing money to Ukraine on its merits. They say President Biden is simply more concerned with dealing with problems between Russia and its border with Ukraine than he is with focusing on America's southern border and the immigration crisis that is playing out there every day. They argue it is simply a waste of American taxpayer money to continue providing assistance to Ukraine. Then you've got more moderate Republicans, particularly in the Senate, but some in the House of Representatives, who say, look, we want to give money to Ukraine, but we also want to force the Biden administration's hand in that negotiating process. And the price they've made for their support for any additional support for Ukraine is a much tougher policy towards illegal immigration on America's southern border by President Biden. They're actively trying to get him to harden his approach to the migrant crisis as the price that he has to pay in order to get their backing for fresh financial aid for Ukraine. The difficulty with that is that President Biden himself is not entirely a free agent in that regard, because if he cracks down on the migration issues too heavily, he'll be facing all sorts of opposition from the progressive left wing of the Democratic Party. So this is a very complicated political thicket for the president to navigate. And Republicans, of course, also have their eye on the electoral calendar here. Everything we talk about this year, at the end of the day, is going to come back to November of this year and the American presidential election, in which so many members of Congress, the entire House of Representatives, and 1/3 of the Senate will also be on the ballot. People are being very careful about the decisions that they make right now for fear that those decisions may come back and bite them as we head closer towards that November election date. And so all of that means that the path to progress on this particular issue is looking very sticky here.
And of course, the Iowa caucuses start in a couple of weeks' time, on the 15th of January, then the New Hampshire primary. So it's all firing up, isn't it?
It is all firing up. 13 days away from the Iowa caucuses, Ian. Can you believe it? Are you excited yet? And it's not just, of course, American lawmakers in Congress that are keeping their eyes on what will become now a pretty intense pace in the US presidential election as we head through the primary and caucus season. There's also no question that Russian President Vladimir Putin is also keeping his eye on the election calendar. And there are foreign policy observers here who argue that Vladimir Putin is unlikely to agree to any kind of serious-minded negotiations over the future of Ukraine while he waits to see whether Donald Trump is returned to the White House, because the Russians would be sensible to conclude, given everything that Donald Trump has said, that a Donald Trump back in the presidency would be very good news for them, particularly on the issue of Ukraine, and is much more likely to try and force Volodymyr Zelensky to give up territory and hand it over to Russia as part of any kind of negotiating process than the Biden administration might be minded to do. Also, of course, this election means that Joe Biden increasingly, with every passing week of this year, will become more and more of a lame duck in the White House, particularly if he can't find the passion necessary to energize voters and turn his record low approval ratings around. And whether it's on the issue of Ukraine or the recovering American economy or the battle to protect democracy, he just hasn't found the passion yet on the campaign trail. And behind the scenes at the White House, his advisors are urging him to begin displaying the energy that he's going to need throughout this year to carry him towards November the 5th, election day here, and to improve his chances of being returned for a second 4 years in power.
Simon, thank you. That's Simon Marks, LBC's US correspondent. Well, I'm now joined by Maria Mezentseva, who is a Ukrainian MP for the Servant of the People Party and the head of the Ukrainian delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. Maria, very good evening. Obviously, everyone uses the new year to try and predict what might happen over the course of the next 12 months. Are you worried that the level of support that Ukraine has had from the international community might start to wane in 2024?
Well, we've been hearing that from day one of, I think, full-scale invasion. First, we've been given 72 hours. Then we've been given several months. Now we're standing for almost 2 years of the full-scale invasion and 10 years in total of aggression, which started in 2014. And I would say this is an existential 1,000 plus years war, which Russian low-level empire is trying to still maintain through the years. I remain positive regardless the fact that just 20 minutes ago there was a massive explosion yet again in the city center of Kharkiv, which is located just less than 40 kilometers from the Russian border, and that's why it's easy to shell us with Soviet-type rockets. Also, the most damages are done by ballistic missiles, and these types which today at 7 a.m. shelled the city center, specifically my constituency, leaving more than 60 people, including children, being wounded, remaining currently at the hospitals, and leaving a 91-year-old lady dead. I've been there myself, helping people. We're trying to accumulate all the possible international support from UK, US, European donors. We have agreed to replace windows, to repair the doors, and to do everything possible to maintain people on the ground in safe places. What I want to say is that our proximity to the border means that Kharkiv, Dnipro, Odessa, even Lviv, all of us, we need the same air defense system as Kiev has. So it's Patriot, it's NASAMS. We are extremely thankful that UK reacted immediately after the recent shelling in Kharkiv, Kiev, Lviv, Odessa, and other areas. You have provided us anti-missile rockets so we can extend our air defense maintenance, but that's really a challenge for the global weaponry and air defense production system. When we had a tour recently in the US in mid-December, we haven't been visiting specifically DC, but we focused on other states. And when we were explaining that this is the investment into the internal security, into using only 2% of U.S. Military budget to tackle 400,000 plus Russian army soldiers who are not alive, so they have they have died on the battlefield. What Russia is doing today is trying to diminish this argument, to say that, look, don't send them blunt checks, them meaning to Ukrainians. So we were twisting this argument to say that, look, guys, you are investing in yourself, creating workplaces. You are renewing your welfare production relatively in a peaceful time for yourself. The NATO has been extended already almost by 2 members. So Sweden is on the way. Finland is already there. We are very much looking forward to the Washington summit. But this is a test for European continent security and peace, but also a global, wider democratic values. And I think because Russia can't beat us on a battlefield because of international support is still with us, they are doing pure genocide. They're targeting our civilian infrastructure. My university has lost 553 windows today. I mean, there is no military being present or any weapon production, as Russia is stating, is placed in education facilities or schools or kindergartens. I mean, I'm trying to keep myself being diplomatic and not swear right now, but really, this information propaganda also twists many minds across the globe. And you've mentioned Israel and sort of destruction. Now, I think we should focus on the fact that we have to prevent this sort of behavior, dictator behavior, aggressive behavior for those who would try to invade, annex territories, rape, kill, and pretend that they're coming home. So we need really to establish international tribunal for the crime of aggression, and UK government, UK people are supporting that. We just need extra political will to execute it. I mean, our destruction of Ukraine has reached over 1 trillion UK pounds if we try to calculate. We are very happy that UK and other 46 plus countries supported us to establish the register of damage of all the war crimes to basically pay back to the people for what they've lost. But how can we assess, a loss of someone in a family, a relative who is in an unknown place, being a hostage currently, like, for instance, my relative now. We don't know where he is. We're still searching for him. And this is a problem also for temporary occupied areas. They are willing to come back. We are trying to move on. Russia didn't succeed by no means 2023. We have liberated small villages, we moved forward, but indeed I am very, very in line with the previous comment. Ukraine needs more weapons. Ukraine needs more sophisticated weapons to fight Russia on the battlefield, where they are not succeeding currently, regardless the fact of the Iranian drones usage, of their FPVs capabilities. We are very much capable to win. We can't do it with sticks and stones. We need progressive weapons on the ground.
Well, I'm really glad to hear you appear so optimistic, and I think your message will be heard loud and clear amongst many people in this country. I don't detect any weakening of UK support for Ukraine, but I wish I could say the same about our friends over in the United States, but maybe they'll sort themselves out soon. Maria, thank you for joining us. That's Maria Mezentseva, who is a Ukrainian MP for the Servant of the People Party, talking to us live from Kharkiv.